6:36 in Trinidad and Tobago as we have a look at the situation in the main junction in Sangre Grande via the camera of traffictt.com. Looks a lot brighter, but we can't rule out some more rain later in the morning and the early afternoon. That has been the pattern over the last few days. But let's move back into studio for our next interview, because we're going to focus on the politics. We are leading up to local government elections in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks from today, in fact, it will be a situation where the polls will be open for local government elections. At Friday's sitting of the lower house, Energy Minister Franklin Khan said that government will not intervene in the Yara exit. It's costing the Norwegian energy company a total of $25 million to shut down its Trinidad ammonia plant, but it's a cost the company is willing to absorb. The minister assured the House that fewer workers will be on the breadline this time around. Well, we have some reporting on it for you.
Which is the operator of the Tringens 1 and 2 plant, which is owned 49% by Yara and 51% by NEL, to absorb as many of those 60 workers as is possible. So the full liability would not be 60.
All right, that's a few seconds there from the Energy Minister. We have a former Planning Minister with the People's Partnership, Member of Parliament for Tewarie Central, Dr. Tewarie, here with us. Dr. Tewarie, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Morning to your listeners.
Sure. Very quickly, just a reaction on the passing of Satnarayan Maharaj.
Well, I think most people are willing to give him his due. He was a complex character, but he is seen, I think, by everyone as a very, very strong and outstanding voice for the Hindu community. And he didn't just talk, he did things, he achieved things, he built things. And I think for that, we need to, at some point in time, do a proper assessment of his contribution in a complex society as well, and maybe understand a little bit why he behaved in the way that he did in order to achieve his ends, but also to understand the significance and value of some of the victories that he was able to achieve, and also to understand what were the driving things that motivated him to put so much emphasis on education and I would say cultural and religious development.
And as you said correctly, I suppose we need more time and
you need time to put it in a frame.
In a proper context.
To me, it's, I mean, when someone dies, you try to say the best things about them, but every life is complex and need to be understood in context and in the framework of the times and the forces that exist. And I think at some point in time, maybe some scholar or some thoughtful person would write something that puts everything in perspective for him.
And we'll await that particular sort of dialogue to develop and unfold. But we're unfolding the political dialogue, quite obviously, because we are a couple of weeks away from a local government election, and we played that bit from the Energy Minister, Franklin Khan, in relation to the closure of Yara, and indicating that the company is going to bear the cost of the shutdown and not as many workers are going to be laid off as feared. What is your perspective as to the situation economically in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I mean, I do have a sense of worry about the economy. I mean, the energy part of our economy is the strongest part. And there are lots of gears that are now misaligned. Recently, you had the situation of Train 1 not being able to be supplied because we just don't have the gas. The gas that BP was expecting turned out to, some of the wells turned out, 2 of the wells turned out to be dry. So you have that issue. Then with the visit by Minister Young and Prime Minister Rowley in 2017 to Houston, where they settled the gas price with EOG, and which then transferred to other players in the system, I think a lot of us in the opposition, we asked a number of questions about that in the parliament. The record would show it, because we were concerned about, first of all, how that negotiation was done. Secondly, that it was done by a political directorate without any support from NGC or the public service. And thirdly, we understood that inevitably, if you raise the price of gas, you're going to create a problem for NGC, which then has to supply downstream gas and would have to renegotiate contracts there. So that's the second element. So you have Atlantic LNG, you have this. All the gas that we are getting now, including the new finds that you are seeing in BHP.
Yeah, because I was just going to make that point, that the BPTT announcing that it's made a discovery in the Ginger exploration well.
Yes, all those, the BP finds and the BHP finds, are based on decisions that were made in 2011, 2014. So this is the ongoing trajectory of exploration and drilling that is taking place. But the fiscal measures that might take us into, let's say, 2030, 2040, 2050, none of those things have been settled yet with the companies. So while we are getting the gas benefit of the decisions of 2011-14, and you would remember that one of the problems was that we had a hiatus of no exploration for about a decade before that period. And you know the gestation period is about 3, 4, 5 years sometimes. I mean, these decisions were made 2011-14. This is 2019. We're now getting some of the gas. We got the first Juniper gas in 2017. So that one took about 3 years. So, you know, in that kind of situation, I mean, we have not settled those issues yet. Then the third thing is the policy issue for the country on what to do with natural gas. Remember, I mean, you could either sell the gas as LNG through Atlantic, and I think it is generally understood that we need better terms for Trinidad and Tobago, so that you have shareholders in that system. You have Shell, you have BP, you have, I forget, the Chinese company as well, with a 10% shareholding. And shareholder interests, even among the shareholders, there are conflict. And shareholder interest in Atlantic LNG are sometimes at odds with government's interests as representing the national interest. So there are those kinds of issues. And then there's the issue of what is going to happen to the downstream now, given the higher prices that need to be negotiated. Can they continue to become competitive? And what will happen to Point Lisas as a place of industrialization? And the second issue is that as a policy issue, do we want to have more downstream? Do we want gas in order to build new industries? Or do we want the natural gas to be turned into LNG and sold abroad and maybe get a bigger cut for it? And what is the proportion that you want? So I think all of those issues remain gears that need to turn in harmony with one another. And my problem with the government is that they really have a very piecemeal approach, one gear at a time. Secondly, I think the Minister of Finance is too concerned about cash flow and revenue rather than seeing the big picture. And that is
why... But doesn't he have to deal with those immediate issues?
He has to deal with that, but you have to deal with that in the context of the bigger and larger interests, because there are trade-offs that you can make. And because of that, I worry, because nothing else is happening in the other sections of the economy. And if we do not secure and manage and make efficient and effective and get the most out of the value chain within the energy sector between now and, let's say, the next 20, 30 years, while we are trying to diversify, we are going to have an even bigger problem than we have now.
Dr. Tewarie, because we are in political season, do you think the populace are really listening to what you are saying in the context of an impartial assessment, or they see you as a UNC looking to make the PNM look bad?
I think, I think both. I think when there are some people who, when they see me, they say, he's speaking for the UNC. he's bound to criticize the government.
Aren't you duty bound? You wouldn't come here and praise them?
No, I won't praise them, but I pride myself on having been trained in such a way that I can be objective. I could give the government their due. I could criticize the UNC if I feel they are doing something wrong. And I can put forward a position for the nation as a person who, although aligned, is capable of independent thought. And I think there are some people who understand that and discern that and know that I'm prepared to do it. It's very hard for me to knowingly tell a lie or misrepresent something that I know to be different. I can't do it. I think if you look at my contribution in Parliament, if you look at the statements that I make, you will see that I try very hard while I'm representing a political party to speak the truth and to speak to the issues that are national and in the national interest. And I hope that more people will understand that that's what I'm doing and that I am not really playing politics for the sake of the moment. Because my concern and the reason I've stayed in politics all of this time is really because of the long-term interests of the country.
And in relation to that, when we talk about long-term interests, and because we're talking about the politics, what trajectory do you see for the nation as far as the way we do our politics?
I think you're talking about the politics or the economics or both?
Well, both, because they're tied in.
Well, I am really worried about the country now, okay? I'm worried about the country because, first of all, the government seems to be cash poor, cash stretched, all right? But there's money in the country. The private sector has money. And if the government could generate the confidence that is required, that money could be deployed in the economy to make a difference. So, for instance, if we made a number of, contending decisions in the energy sector, and we were able to get that going and people were clear where we were headed for the next 20, 25 years. And if the government could take the position, look, it is time now to take decisions that allow the private sector to play a more major role in the economy. The state must retreat a little bit. And we wanted to address the big issues in the country, which is that the widening gap between rich and poor. You wanted more equity, home ownership, share ownership, land ownership, etc., spread in the country so people have a stake. If the government were to do that, I think that their confidence would be returned, and a lot of money that is outside, a lot of money that are being held back from not investing would in fact show itself as investment in the country. But the government is not prone to do that. The whole character, the disposition, the culture of the Rowley government seems to me hostile to that, because they are suspicious of every stakeholder in the country and always feel that some stakeholder trying to get the better of the government.
Can't the same be said of the UNC and the UNC's style of governance, whether it was under Basdeo Pandey or Kamla Prasad Bisesa, that it was always about an us and them type of the way you depict the nation?
No, I think I can't speak for every administration, but I think in the last administration, I think there was a fair amount of confidence. There was a facilitation of investment in the country. That is why we took the chance, for instance, with the energy players in 2011 to 2014. That is why we had the Mitsubishi investment as a new investment in energy. And that has also significant bearing for the future. That is an industry that can really build a future in manufacturing. If we manage it right, you have a new fuel, DME, that we never had before. It is derived out of methanol. You have about 7 methanol plants in Trinidad and Tobago. So if you wanted to go in that direction, you could do something. So, all of these things need to be thought through in a serious way. And what I worry about is the fact that not only are we not doing that, but our debt is very high now. The central bank says it is 102 billion. That's to say the official debt. This is based on the most recent report. The indebtedness is another 60 billion more. That is to say, not government direct debt, but the state is indebted for that. When you look at the state as a larger set of entities that comprise the state apparatus. And that is almost the size of our GDP. I mean, so our debt is almost equal to our GDP.
Is that correct? Because Mariana Brown was on the show last week and we were talking about debt to GDP about 62%.
Yeah, well, that is what the official figure is. But I'm trying to make a statement, not the debt to GDP ratio, but I'm trying to show that let's say the GDP is about 170, which it is, $billion. But the debt itself is about 100, and the indebtedness, I would say.
The overall level
debt,
of indebtedness.
Indebtedness is about $160 billion. So, I mean, you're not going to check debt to GDP ratio in that way, but I think it allows you to sense what part of your problem is.
If I could ask just to pause for a second, because we just have to take a commercial break and we'll continue because we have a few minutes left with the County Central Member of Parliament, Dr. Tewarie, and we'll be back with some more of his thoughts as we count down towards local government elections and indeed get a better sense as to where we are in the politics of Trinidad and Tobago and the economics of Trinidad and Tobago, more right after this break. Okay, so you're going to the news now? Right. Toss to the news at 7 o'clock. Okay, cool. And then come back for a few more minutes after. Okay, no problem. Okay, cool.
Con bandola, con bajo y maraca, tocamos para mira arriba y canta arriba, cantando por la cantina, arriba y canta arriba, cantando por la cantina, cantamos por baladas, cantamos cantamos al joropo, cantamos a Caíta, cantamos a Quinaldo, cantamos al río.
6:56 in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a few more minutes with Dr. Tewarie before the news at the top of the hour, and then we'll get some final thoughts from him and wrap up right after the news. But Dr. Tewarie, it seems to be, bottom line, a case of competing narratives. Who do we believe as far as the performance of the economy?
Well, I mean, you should believe the numbers, you know. And
but even numbers, you could frame in a particular context.
The numbers can be manipulated, but you've got to read the numbers first of all. You've got to know what the facts are. So, for instance, I mean, there's a narrative. Remember, there was a narrative by Mr. Imbert as Minister of Finance that we had a turnaround, we had turned the corner, etc. That turned out not to be true at all. What we've had is a minus 6.7% decline, 2017. Minus 2.3, sorry, 2016, minus 2.3, 2017, minus 0.2, 2018. And so the narrative of turnaround has turned out to be false. We were misled. The facts do not bear it out. And now you have a narrative that we are going to get out of it, that there's going to be a 1.7 growth in 2019. How are you going to get that when Petrotrin, the refinery, has been closed down? When Heritage has to find foreign exchange in order to buy the fuel that we need? How are you going to get that when Yara is going to shut down? How are you going to get that when there are no new decisions in energy that would propel you into the 2020s, 2030s, etc., in terms of revenue generation from exploration and drilling? How are you going to get that when the non-energy sector is in serious decline? So there is likely to be no growth in 2019, no growth in 2020. Yet the government's narrative is that the recession is receding. The Prime Minister himself said that at this Sunday meeting in the Savannah. So, I mean, it doesn't help us that the government gives us a false narrative. It would be better if the government says, look, these are the facts, all right? These are what the numbers tell us. These are the challenges, and this is how we are trying to deal with the challenges. You could then assess whether they are doing it properly or not, or whether they are mismanaging. And my own feeling is that when they give you a combination of false narrative and mismanagement of the situation, I think the country gets scared, which is why the business community is so lacking in confidence in the economy.
Wouldn't the UNC do exactly the same thing if the show was on the other foot?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think in this situation it is so serious. I mean, if the UNC were to get into power now, these would be the challenges that we have to face.
And you'd spend the next 5 years blaming the PNM for the situation?
Well, you'll blame the PNM a little bit because they did create a certain situation, but I don't think we're going to spend 5 years like they did blaming them. You might do that in the first year and show what the reality is, but you have to solve it. One of the things the political leader of the UNC said in her budget presentation is that we are going
Was that a budget presentation or a manifesto for the next election?
No, well, one of the things she said was that she will basically outline what is the debt situation and a strategy for the repayment of debt over the longer period. And she would also have a debt workout strategy for each of the state enterprises that was in debt. So at least transparently, the country would know what is happening.
Let's go for the news very quickly, and then you can finish off on those points, because we'll have a few minutes left with Member of Parliament, Dr. Tewarie. Let's go to the news, because it is 7 o'clock, and then we'll come back with some final thoughts.
Good morning. I am Aksha Gulston with your news update to the hour. Tobago police are investigating the drowning of 2 young people at Argyle Waterfall on Sunday while attending a birthday lime. Dead are Carisha Thompson, a 15-year-old student of Scarborough Secondary School, and 19-year-old Krishlon Walters of Argyle, Tobago. According to police reports, the two were among 8 at the waterfall, celebrating the birthday of a friend when a sudden gush of water came down on the group. Fire officers responded and managed to rescue 6 of them, but Carisha and Chrislon died at the scene. In other news, tents are already up at Lakshmi Girls High School for the hundreds of guests expected to turn out for Tuesday's funeral of the former Secretary General of the Sanata Dharma Mahasabha, Sat Maharaj. The exact list of attendees is still being finalized, but there could be some high-level speakers from across the political spectrum. Meanwhile, the Minister of Education, Anthony Garcia, says he is willing to approve a day off on Tuesday for Mahasabha schools to allow students and teachers to attend the funeral. It's now time for a look at your weather report. Today is expected to be mainly sunny, becoming mostly cloudy at times, with isolated showers and the medium chance of the afternoon isolated thunder shower. The forecast maximum is set at 32 degrees Celsius in Trinidad and 30 degrees Celsius in Tobago. Seas are slight to moderate with waves up to 1.5 meters in open waters and calm in sheltered areas.
In Trinidad and Tobago, as we have just a few minutes left with the Member of Parliament for Caroni Central and former Planning Minister Dr. Boyendradat Tewarie. Dr. Tewarie, I mean, again, we don't have time to really develop some of the points that we'd like to, but essentially, because you're talking to the electorate basically for December 2nd, isn't it about trying to convince, you trying to convince about the UNC's way of doing things being the right way for the country, and the PNM and their representatives doing exactly the same thing, and at the end of the day, is whoever is more convincing?
Well, I mean, there is that. I mean, there's the communication issue, the public relations, all of that. But, I mean, if we look at the facts and we see what our situation is, we are seeing that there are a number of issues that we have to resolve in the energy sector, or else the traditional energy sector, which is now dominantly oil and gas, dominantly natural gas, is not going to be sustainable. All right? So the first thing I would say is that those issues in energy need to be fixed in a way that they sort of reinforce each other to get the energy sector sustainable. The second thing is that we need to address the issue of confidence. And you cannot address the issue of confidence by presenting a false narrative. And then the whole country sees and knows that you are presenting a false narrative because nothing is happening. From the person who has to put food on the table, the worker who has to deal with wages, the businessman who has to invest or cut his workers, or has to make arrangements in the bank that are different, etc., simply to survive. Everybody knows that what you are saying is not true, so it doesn't yield any confidence. And we do need to have a strategy which allows for confidence, that would allow for investment, for growth, for diversification, for job creation, because that is possible. That's the only way to get a recovery. The only way you can get a recovery is if there is confidence enough to cause investment to happen, whether that is energy investment, local investment outside of energy, foreign investment outside of energy or in energy, whatever you call it. And we do have the intellectual capital base to make that happen. We graduate about 4,000 or 5,000 people out of the tertiary sector every year. There are about 6,000 to 8,000 of them now with the new graduation who are looking for jobs. If you had the right industries investing in this country, all of these people would be absorbed. They would be knowledge-oriented businesses. They would be businesses that were driven by technology, and you really need to make space now for the private sector, and the state has to retreat.
So the obvious question is, Dr. Tewarie, why wasn't that happening between 2010 and 2015?
Because in 2010, remember, you had a situation in which we were moving out of the 2008-2009 crisis. A consequence of that was the CLICO matter, which remained the burden. This government talks about all the burdens.
You realize how you're saying
no,
that,
no.
You know, you're blaming either the
No, I'm not blaming. I'm not blaming. This was part of what happened in the country. So you had to solve some of those problems. You had a lot of contractors who were owed, you had to negotiate, you had to deal with that. And we had to move the country from decline to try and get it to grow. And we succeeded in doing that. The numbers would tell you.
The argument will be, Dr. Roy, that you succeeded in indebting the nation even further with all these extravagant contracts and questionable deals and so on. For example, the Prime Minister has repeatedly talked about the Curep interchange, that they're able to get it done for considerably less than what the UNC were doing.
No, we have to put everything in context. I don't know if that narrative is correct. It may be that the price of the Curep interchange under the People's Partnership was higher. But I don't know if what the PNM negotiated for the Curep interchange now was the exact same thing.
So who do we believe, Dr. Tewarie? Really,
well,
at the end of the day, who do we believe?
I think the population should hold the politicians to account. They should ask them to explain. They should ask them to put the numbers. I am prepared to account for anything under my tenure in planning. I am prepared to articulate any point of view and argue the case, advocate the case, all right, on the basis of rationality, on the basis of reason. The population should demand this. The population cannot emotionally decide on something that will determine the future of the country, which, if you make the wrong decision, would turn out to be very bad, as in fact it has turned out over these last 4 years under the government. And that is the challenge for the population. So while there is responsibility and obligation on the part of political leaders and the politicians, there is also responsibility and obligation and the necessity of mature decision-making, discernment on the part of the population as well. So it's a many-way street. And
therefore, is in reality, as an academic yourself, isn't what you're saying unrealistic?
No.
Because it happens in the United States with Donald Trump, it happens in the UK with Brexit. Once you have good, effective advertising and you sell something, whether it's the red or the yellow, that is what is more important than the actual facts and the discernment that you're talking about.
No, the world is showing, yes, you are right, that you can manipulate public opinion, that you can influence behavior, not necessarily in the right direction. But now that we know that, all right, then you've got to find, like anything else, if you know what the poison is, you have to have an antidote. So you have to create an antidote for that. And I really feel that the antidote is free and democratic discussion and engagement of the people. I mean, you can lie all you want, but after a while, when people ask you the right questions and you either cannot answer or you are forced to answer correctly, they will know in their heart, all right, what should be their decision. I think you need to believe in the democracy. That is what we are seeing now in the United States. I mean, this is supposed to be the bastion of democracy in the world over the last, more than 200, nearly 300 years now. This is supposed to be the bastion of democracy in the world. And look how it is being tested. The Constitution, the institutions, everything in the society. But you have democracy. So people are fighting back, whether it's at the people level, whether it's at the media level, whether it is at the public opinion level, whether it is, even if the Republican members of the Senate or the Congress do not wish to shift because they are loyal in allegiance to the president, you have a situation in which Republican thinkers, all right, who have influenced the landscape at the intellectual level in magazines, in writing, in public opinion, etc., are shifting.
Do you think...
You see, and that's part of the problem. In any society, you need a responsible class that is not aligned. And by class, I don't mean anything except a responsible group.
We have to leave it there for the moment,
Okay.
Dr. Tewarie. Thank you very much for taking the time, as
Thank
always,
you.
to share.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity
You're more
to
than
express
welcome.
my point of view.
Indeed. 10 minutes after 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago. We'll be back right after this.